Mira Hanley had exactly $47 in her bank account when she received the invitation to discuss her future. The irony wasn't lost on her. 3 weeks ago, she'd had a fiancé, an apartment, and a life that looked like it was finally coming together. Now she had a suitcase of belongings, a friend's couch to sleep on, and a lawyer's business card pressed into her palm by a stranger who'd said only, "Victor wants to meet you." She almost didn't go. The address led to Ravenport's financial district, to a building so tall it seemed to pierce the clouds, to an office on the 23rd floor where the receptionist greeted her by name before she'd even introduced herself. Everything about the situation screamed danger, screamed trap, screamed turn around and run. But Mira had learned something in the past 3 weeks. When you had nothing left to lose, fear became negotiable. The man waiting in the corner office wasn't what she expected. Victor Cole rose from behind an enormous mahogany desk, and Mira recognized him immediately. Ethan's uncle, the family member who was never invited to gatherings, whose name made Ethan's mother's face pinch with disapproval. He was perhaps mid-40s, with dark hair silvering at the temples and eyes that seemed to catalog everything about her in a single glance. "Miss Hanley, thank you for coming." His voice was quiet, controlled, the kind of voice that never needed to be raised to command attention. "I assume you're wondering why I asked to see you." The thought crossed my mind. Mira remained standing, defensive despite her precarious situation. "If this is about Ethan, this has nothing to do with my nephew, except peripherally." Victor gestured to the chair across from him. "Please sit. I have a proposition that I think you'll find interesting." Mira sat, her hands gripping her purse. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows behind Victor, Ravenport, spread out like a glittering promise, all steel and glass and money. So much money, money she'd never had. Money Ethan had promised they'd have together once his company took off. Money that had ultimately mattered more than 3 years of loyalty. Victor slid a folder across the desk. "I need a wife, Miss Hanley, for reasons both personal and professional that I'll explain if you're interested in proceeding. In exchange for 3 years of your time, I'm prepared to offer you financial security, social standing, and the satisfaction of watching my nephew realize exactly what he threw away." Mira opened the folder with trembling fingers. Inside was a contract dense with legal language, but certain numbers jumped out at her. Numbers with more zeros than she'd ever imagined having access to. "You want to marry me?" "I want to enter into a mutually beneficial arrangement that happens to involve marriage. Yes." Victor leaned back in his chair, completely at ease. "You need stability. I need a wife who understands that this is a business transaction, not a romance. Someone intelligent enough to navigate my world, discreet enough to ask no uncomfortable questions, and available enough to begin immediately." "Why me?" The question came out sharper than she intended. "You could have anyone. Someone from your own world. Someone who already knows the rules." "Because everyone in my world has an agenda, Miss Hanley. You have a grudge, which is infinitely more honest." Something that might have been amusement flickered across Victor's face. "And because my nephew is a fool who mistakes usefulness for value, I found that people who've been underestimated tend to be the most formidable once they stop playing by other people's rules." Mira stared at the contract, her mind racing. 3 weeks ago, she'd been planning a wedding to a man she'd supported through every failure, every setback, every midnight crisis. She'd worked 2 jobs so Ethan could focus on his startup. She'd edited his presentations, networked with his investors, played the perfect, supportive girlfriend while her own dreams gathered dust. And the moment someone more useful appeared, Lydia Moore, with her father's venture capital money and her society connections, Ethan had discarded Mira like a worn-out tool. The humiliation still burned, the way he'd announced it at a business dinner, surrounded by his investors, as if Mira's heartbreak was just another item on the agenda. The way Lydia had smirked and called her no longer useful. The way everyone had laughed, polite and devastating, before returning to their important conversations while Mira stood there drowning in her own irrelevance. "What exactly would you require from me?" Mira asked, her voice steadier now. "Public appearances as my wife, attendance at certain business dinners and social events, residence in my home, discretion about the nature of our arrangement and about anything you might observe regarding my business affairs." Victor's gaze never wavered. "In exchange, you'll have access to substantial financial resources, your own private quarters, and complete freedom to pursue your own interests. The marriage would be real in every legal sense, but intimate only if we both choose. At the end of 3 years, you walk away with enough money to start whatever life you want, no strings attached." "And if I want to leave before 3 years?" The contract stipulates certain reduced compensation for early termination, but you'd still leave with more than most people see in a lifetime. Victor pulled out a pen, set it on top of the folder. I'm not interested in keeping anyone prisoner, Miss Hanley. I'm interested in a partner who chooses to be here. Mira looked at the pen, then at Victor, then out the window at the city that had chewed her up and spat her out. She thought about the friend's couch she was sleeping on, the job applications that went nowhere because she'd sacrificed her own career for Ethan's dreams. She thought about starting over with nothing while Ethan and Lydia planned their perfect society wedding. She thought about the look on Ethan's face when he learned she'd married his uncle. Where do I sign? The wedding happened 72 hours later in a private courthouse ceremony. No flowers, no music, no guests, except 2 witnesses Mira had never met and suspected she never would again. She wore a cream dress she'd bought that morning with money from an advance Victor had provided. Victor wore a charcoal suit that probably cost more than Mira's entire wardrobe. A judge asked the required questions. They exchanged simple platinum bands, and in less than 15 minutes, Mira Hanley became Mira Cole. That's it? She asked as they walked out into the spring afternoon. That's it. Victor opened the door to a sleek black car where a driver waited. We have a dinner tonight where I'll introduce you. Marcus will collect your belongings from your current accommodation and bring them to the estate this afternoon. I don't have much. You won't need much. Everything's been arranged. The estate was the first shock in a day full of them. Mira watched through the car window as they passed through iron gates and up a tree-lined drive toward a stone mansion that looked transplanted from European countryside. Gardens stretched in every direction, manicured and lush. The house itself was 3 stories of weathered stone and tall windows, beautiful in an intimidating old money way. You live here alone? I have staff, and now I have a wife. Victor's tone was matter-of-fact as they pulled up to the front entrance. Mrs. Chen will show you to your quarters and help you prepare for tonight. Mrs. Chen materialized as if summoned, a small woman in her 60s, with efficient hands and kind eyes. She greeted Mira with a slight bow and immediate warmth, then led her through halls lined with art that looked genuinely old and valuable. The ceilings were high, the floors gleamed, and everything spoke of wealth so established it didn't need to announce itself. These are your rooms, Mrs. Chen said, opening double doors into a suite that was larger than the entire apartment Mira had shared with Ethan. Tall windows overlooked the gardens. The furniture was antique but comfortable, the colors soft and elegant. A door led to a bathroom with a soaking tub, another to a walk-in closet already filled with clothes. Mr. Cole's quarters are in the east wing. You have complete privacy here. If you need anything, there's a phone on the nightstand that connects directly to my office. Mira walked to the windows, looking out at manicured lawns and flowering trees. Mrs. Chen, how long have you worked for Mr. Cole? 22 years. Mrs. Cole? The older woman's voice was warm. Since he first came to Ravenport. What's he like? Really like? Mrs. Chen considered the question carefully. Mr. Cole is a man who values loyalty above all else. He protects what's his and honors his commitments. Beyond that, I think you'll have to discover for yourself. She moved toward the door. The stylist will arrive at 4 to help you prepare for the dinner. If the clothing doesn't fit properly, we'll have it adjusted immediately. After Mrs. Chen left, Mira explored the closet with growing disbelief. Evening gowns, casual wear, shoes, jewelry, everything coordinated, everything clearly expensive, everything in her exact size. She'd never provided measurements, never discussed preferences. Victor had simply known, or had made it his business to know, which was somehow more unsettling. She chose a midnight blue dress for the dinner, let the stylist work magic with her hair and makeup, and tried to quiet the voice in her head that kept asking what she'd gotten herself into. When she emerged from her suite at 7, Victor was waiting at the bottom of the stairs. He looked up as she descended, and something flickered in his eyes. Appreciation, perhaps, or surprise. You look lovely, he said simply, offering his arm. I look expensive, Mira corrected, accepting his arm. There's a difference. Then you look expensively lovely. Was that amusement in his voice? The people we're meeting tonight will expect a certain presentation. You'll find them interesting. Interesting turned out to be an understatement. The dinner was at an exclusive restaurant Mira had never been able to afford, in a private room where 5 people waited. She recognized Senator Bradford from the news. He was always on television denouncing organized crime and corruption. The others were unfamiliar. An elegant older woman, introduced as Mrs. Liu, 2 businessmen, whose names Mira immediately forgot, and a younger man who stood slightly apart, his eyes constantly scanning the room with professional vigilance. "Gentlemen, Mrs. Liu." Victor's hand rested lightly at the small of Mira's back. "My wife, Mira." The introductions flowed smoothly, full of polite words and appraising looks. Mira shook hands, smiled, murmured appropriate responses while her mind raced. These weren't Victor's friends. The dynamic was wrong for friendship. They deferred to him too carefully, watched him too closely. Senator Bradford, who built his career on anti-corruption rhetoric, spoke to Victor with the careful respect of someone who knew exactly where the real power sat. Over dinner, Mira listened more than she spoke. The conversation touched on development projects, shipping regulations, commercial real estate. Nothing obviously illegal, but the subtext hummed beneath every exchange. Mrs. Liu mentioned difficulties with permits. Victor suggested a contact who might help. One of the businessmen complained about customs delays. Victor promised to make a call. The senator discussed upcoming legislation and seemed very interested in Victor's opinion on how certain provisions might affect business interests. The young man who'd been watching the room caught Mira's eye once and gave her the slightest nod. Not friendly, exactly. More like acknowledgement, recognition that she'd been brought into the fold. "Your wife is lovely, Victor," Senator Bradford said, over the main course, his smile not quite reaching his eyes. "How did you two meet?" "Through family," Victor replied, without missing a beat. Mira has a gift for seeing through pretense. I found that refreshing. Under the table, Victor's hand found Mira's, squeezed gently. Warning or reassurance, she couldn't tell. She squeezed back anyway, a silent acknowledgement that she understood the game being played even if she didn't yet know all. The rules. The dinner ended near midnight. In the car, heading back to the estate, Mira finally broke the silence. "Those people aren't normal business associates." "They're exactly business associates, just not the kind you're used to." The senator builds his entire platform on fighting corruption. And he's very effective at fighting his competitors' corruption while protecting his own interests. Victor glanced at her. "Does that bother you?" "I don't know yet," Mira answered honestly. "What I do know is that the young man watching the door was armed. Senator Bradford was terrified of you despite his smile, and Mrs. Liu controls half of Chinatown's commercial real estate through methods I suspect don't appear in any textbook." Victor's lips curved slightly. "You're more observant than I expected. You said I have a gift for seeing through pretense. Did you mean it? Or was that just a convenient lie for the senator? I rarely lie when the truth is more useful." The car turned through the estate gates. "You want to ask me something, Mira? Ask it." "What kind of business are you really in?" Victor was quiet for a long moment. The car pulled up to the house, but neither of them moved to get out. "I facilitate transactions that other people can't or won't handle through legitimate channels. I move money, goods, and occasionally people across borders when official channels are too slow, too expensive, or too restrictive. I provide capital to businesses that banks won't touch, and protection to people who can't rely on police. Some of what I do is legal. Much of it exists in gray areas. Some of it would send me to prison if anyone could prove it and was willing to try." Mira absorbed this, her heart pounding. "You're a criminal." "I'm a businessman operating in a world where law and justice aren't the same thing." Victor turned to face her fully. "I don't deal in drugs. I don't traffic in people for exploitation. I don't hurt anyone who doesn't threaten me first. But I move money that governments want to track, facilitate trades that regulations want to prevent, and provide services that society pretends not to need while benefiting from them daily. Does that make me a criminal? Legally, yes. Morally, I believe that's more complicated. And you married me knowing I'd figure this out. I married you hoping you'd figure it out and choose to stay anyway." Victor's gaze was steady. "The contract stands regardless, Mira. You can leave tonight with enough money to start over anywhere you want. I won't stop you and I won't punish you. But I hope you'll stay, because I think you understand something most people don't." "What's that?" "That the world isn't divided into good people and bad people. It's divided into people who pretend the rules apply to everyone and people who acknowledge that rules are just another form of power." Victor opened his car door. "Think about it. Take whatever time you need. I'll be in my study if you want to talk." Mira sat in the car for another 10 minutes after Victor went inside, staring at the beautiful house that was now technically her home. She thought about Ethan, who'd played by every rule, networked with every right person, and still ended up cooking his books to impress investors. She thought about the business dinners where she'd watched supposedly legitimate businessmen lie, cheat, and manipulate while congratulating themselves on their integrity. She thought about Victor, who at least was honest about what he was. Inside the house, she found Mrs. Chen waiting with tea and quiet understanding. "Mr. Cole said you might want something soothing. Mrs. Chen, can I ask you something?" Mira accepted the tea gratefully. "Why do you stay, working for someone who does what he does?" The older woman settled into a chair across from her. "My son needed surgery 10 years ago. The insurance company denied the claim, said it was experimental. Mr. Cole paid for everything, asked for nothing in return. When my husband's restaurant was being forced out by developers, Mr. Cole made it clear that anyone who harassed us would answer to him. He's never asked me to do anything that conflicts with my conscience, and he's protected my family when no one else would." She met Mira's eyes. "The world isn't black and white, Mrs. Cole. Mr. Cole understands that better than most." Mira found Victor in his study an hour later, reading through papers with a focus that seemed almost meditative. He looked up when she entered, set aside his work, waited. "I'm staying," Mira said. "Not because I'm afraid to leave, not because of the money, though I'd be lying if I said it didn't matter. I'm staying because in 3 weeks of being free, the only person who's been honest with me is you. Because you gave me a choice when Ethan never did. Because somehow the criminal has more integrity than the man who pretended to play by the rules." Victor studied her for a long moment. "You understand what you're choosing? The risks, the moral compromises, the fact that you'll be complicit in things you can't undo. I understand that I've been complicit in a system that crushed me the moment I stopped being useful. I understand that legitimacy didn't protect me, that playing by the rules left me sleeping on a friend's couch with $47. Mira moved further into the room. "I'm not naive enough to think you're a hero, Victor. But I'm done pretending that the alternative is heroic either. So yes, I'm staying. And I want to understand your world, not just exist in it." Something shifted in Victor's expression, a wall coming down fractionally. "Then sit, and I'll tell you a story about a boy who grew up in Hong Kong's Kowloon-walled city, who learned that the only thing that keeps you safe in a world designed to devour the weak is power." They talked until dawn. Victor spoke of things Mira could barely imagine: the violence of the walled city, the crime syndicates that ruled where government couldn't reach, the choices a child makes to survive when survival itself is a crime. He told her how he'd built his network connection by connection, favor by favor, until he commanded respect from senators and criminals alike. "I came to Ravenport 23 years ago with nothing," Victor said, as the sun began to rise outside his windows. "No money, no connections, just skills that were valuable to the right people. I built this empire by understanding that everyone needs something they can't get legitimately. Respectability is just a mask we wear, Mira. Underneath, everyone's surviving the best way they know how." "And what do you need?" Mira asked quietly. "What does the man who has everything still want?" Victor looked at her, really looked at her, and for the first time she saw vulnerability beneath the control. "I wanted someone who could stand beside me without either worshiping or judging, someone strong enough to see what I am and choose me anyway. I thought that was impossible until my nephew was stupid enough to throw you away." The words hung between them, honest and raw. Mira stood, crossed to where Victor sat, and made a choice that had nothing to do with contracts or revenge. She kissed him, soft and tentative, a question rather than a demand. Victor responded with careful intensity, his hand coming up to cup her face as if she were something precious. When they pulled apart, both were trembling slightly. "This complicates the arrangement," Victor said, his forehead resting against hers. "Everything's already complicated," Mira whispered. "What's a little more?" The next 6 weeks blurred together in a strange education. Mira attended dinners where she learned to read the subtext beneath polite conversation. She met the men who worked for Victor: Chen, Marcus, Daniel, others whose names she filed away along with their roles. She began to understand the ecosystem Victor had built, the careful balance of power and obligation that kept everything functioning. And slowly, carefully, she and Victor circled closer to each other. He came to her rooms, and she went to his. They shared meals, conversations, eventually a bed. It wasn't the passionate romance of movies. It was quieter than that, deeper. Two people who'd both been alone, learning to be vulnerable together. Then came the evening that changed everything. Victor had been tense for days, more phone calls, more closed-door meetings. Chen and the others were on high alert. Mira had learned to recognize the signs of serious business and usually stayed out of the way. But when Victor appeared in her doorway dressed in black, looking grimmer than she'd ever seen him, fear spiked through her chest. "I need to handle something tonight," he said without preamble. "A disagreement about territory that's escalated past negotiation. It may get dangerous. If anyone comes to the house, anyone at all, Mrs. Chen will take you to the safe room. You don't come out until I return, or you hear the all-clear signal from Chen. Do you understand?" Mira stood, her book forgotten. "Victor, what's happening?" "A rival organization has been encroaching on operations we've controlled for a decade. We've tried to negotiate. They've responded with threats." His jaw tightened. "I won't let threats go unanswered, and I won't risk them coming here. So I'm handling it tonight, personally." "Let someone else go. Chen, or—" "This requires my presence. Showing weakness now would be worse than any physical danger." Victor crossed to her, took her hands. "If something happens to me, everything's already arranged, you'll be protected and provided for. But I don't intend to let anything happen." "That's not reassuring." "It's honest." He squeezed her hands. "I'll be back by morning." He left, and Mira paced her rooms for an hour before Mrs. Chen found her and showed her to the safe room, a reinforced chamber hidden behind a bookshelf in Victor's study. Inside were supplies, communications equipment, and monitors showing every angle of the estate. Mrs. Chen explained how everything worked with calm efficiency, as if this were routine. "Has he done this before?" Mira asked. "Gone into danger like this?" "Mr. Cole has been handling dangerous situations since before you were born," Mrs. Chen said gently. "He knows what he's doing." But knowing didn't stop Mira from watching the monitors obsessively, didn't stop her from jumping at every sound. She tried to read, to sleep, but ended up just sitting in the dark, waiting for dawn and praying to a god she wasn't sure she believed in that Victor would come home safe. He returned as the sun rose, rumpled and tired but unharmed. Mira met him in the hallway, having heard the car in the drive. Relief flooded through her so powerfully her knees weakened. "You're okay." "I'm okay." Victor looked surprised to find her waiting, still dressed from the night before. "You didn't sleep." "I was worried." The admission came out raw, unguarded. Victor stared at her for a moment, then he crossed the space between them and pulled her into his arms, holding her like she was the only solid thing in a shifting world. Mira buried her face in his chest, felt his heart beating strong and steady, and realized with absolute certainty that this had stopped being an arrangement somewhere along the way. "I'm not good at this," Victor murmured against her hair. "The emotional part, caring about someone beyond strategy and loyalty. I've spent so long being untouchable that I forgot how to be anything else." Mira pulled back enough to look at him. "Then we'll figure it out together." "I want that." He cupped her face gently. "I've wanted it since you walked into my office and demanded to know the catch. You were so fierce, so certain you wouldn't be anyone's victim again. I knew then you were remarkable." Their kiss was different this time. Not tentative or questioning, but certain. A claiming and a surrender, a promise that neither of them could take back even if they wanted to. They became partners after that night, in every sense. Victor began including Mira in certain discussions, trusting her observations about the people they met. She started handling some of the social management, using her gift for reading people to navigate the complex web of obligations and favors that kept Victor's empire running. She wasn't innocent anymore, if she ever had been. But she was powerful, in ways she'd never imagined, respected in ways Ethan had never offered. 3 months into the marriage, Ethan's world collapsed. Mira heard about it first from a forwarded news article. The SEC was investigating Cole Tech for securities fraud. Then the story exploded. Harrison Moore pulling his investment, federal charges being filed, Lydia Moore nowhere to be found as Ethan's carefully constructed empire crumbled into lawsuits and scandal. "Did you do this?" Mira asked Victor that evening, though she already knew the answer. "I made some calls to people who were already investigating Ethan's practices," Victor admitted. They were in his study, Mira curled in the chair across from his desk. "I may have provided certain documents that made their case stronger. But Ethan dug his own grave, Mira. He was falsifying numbers long before I took an interest. I just made sure the right people noticed." "You did it for me." "I did it because he deserved consequences for how he treated you. And because I don't like loose ends that might threaten my wife." Victor set aside his work. "Are you angry?" Mira considered the question honestly. A few months ago, she might have been shocked, might have protested that revenge was beneath her. But she'd learned too much about how the world actually worked. "No, I'm not angry. He made his choices. You just made sure he faced them. Very pragmatic of you, Mrs. Cole. I learned from the best, Mr. Cole. Ethan tried one last time to reach Mira, showing up at a charity gala where she and Victor were attending. The moment Mira saw him across the ballroom, thin and desperate, the golden boy veneer completely stripped away, she felt nothing. Not satisfaction, not pity, just a distant recognition of someone who'd once mattered and no longer did. He approached during the cocktail hour, and Mira felt Victor stiffen beside her. Chen materialized from somewhere, positioning himself strategically, but Mira touched Victor's arm, a silent request to let her handle this. Mira, please! Ethan's voice cracked. I know I don't deserve it, but I need to talk to you. Everything's falling apart. The investigation, the lawsuits, Lydia won't even return my calls. Why are you telling me this, Ethan? Mira kept her voice level, aware of the people watching, the whispers starting. What exactly do you think I can do? You know people now. You're married to... He glanced nervously at Victor, then back to Mira. I made a mistake. I was stupid, I thought. You thought I was disposable? Mira interrupted quietly. That I was only valuable when I was useful to you. You traded 3 years of loyalty for a woman with the right last name, and now you're learning that relationships built on utility collapse the moment the utility ends. I loved you, Ethan said desperately. I still... No, you didn't. Mira stood, and Victor rose smoothly beside her. You loved what I did for you. There's a difference, Ethan, and I hope you figure that out someday. I really do. But I'm done being your solution to problems you created. They walked away, leaving Ethan standing alone while the gala continued around him. Outside, in the cool night air, Victor turned to Mira. You could have asked me to help him. I would have. For you. I know. Mira looked up at the stars, the city lights making them harder to see. A few months ago, I might have. But you taught me something, Victor. Power isn't about revenge. It's about choosing who deserves your protection and who doesn't. Ethan made his choices. I've made mine. Victor pulled her close, kissed her temple. And what choice is that? You. This complicated, dangerous, completely unexpected life. Us. They stood in the darkness, two people who'd found each other in the wreckage of their separate ruins and built something neither had expected. It wasn't the fairy tale Mira had once imagined. It was better, more real, more honest, built on choice rather than illusion. If this story moved you, don't forget to like, comment with your thoughts, and subscribe for more stories that will keep you hooked from start to finish. What did you think of Mira's journey? Drop your thoughts below, and I'll see you in the next one.